We are the LitLive reading series. We are obviously using Zoom teleconferencing. I just want to thank everybody who's taken the trouble to join us tonight. I think you're going to find the reward well worth it. Until March 2020, we were doing our act at the Staircase Theatre in Hamilton, which now we have to think of as the good old days because unfortunately the Staircase organization was unable to survive the early months of the pandemic without income from audiences, and they had to close this summer. And we have been advised there'll be no reopening of the Staircase. So along with the challenge of running Zoom events, we have the challenge of finding ourselves a new home in the physical world, but we are working on that, and I promise that as soon as it's possible to meet in person, we will be doing that. And of course, we're not alone. Everyone in the arts sector, be they individuals or organizations, is struggling with the difficulties the pandemic provides, the loss of income and loss of audience, loss of ability to connect and to travel as we used to. At LitLive, we continue to pay our readers the same rates as when we were at the Staircase. And LitLive Online is also, I should mention, a free event and will remain so for the foreseeable future. We won't be raffling any more books, of course, but there will be no tickets for the audience to purchase either. LitLive continues to be funded by the Ontario Arts Council and the Canada Council for the Arts, as well as Hamilton Arts Council. And to those organizations and to our audiences, we are sincerely grateful. As we go through this evening, I would encourage our writers to post a sales link either to their publisher's website or to their favorite bookseller. Any bookseller that has a website through which they sell, and put that link in our chat feed, because we still believe in selling books, and that book sales are an important part of the reason why we do this. We will still miss the conversations around the book table, which were the table that was operated for so many years by our committee member, Jennifer Tan. Technical management of tonight's event is being handled by Gary Barwin. Susan Shaw has done most of the work in booking and scheduling our readers. Christine Missione will moderate the question and answer with the authors, which will take place at the end of this event. And as I might have mentioned, we have 4 readers tonight, and as well, we present the pedal steel guitar stylings of Ben Robinson at our intermission. Our committee is rounded out by Liz Tessier, who reads more of the applications to the LitLive Booking Committee than anyone else, I suspect. And I'm your host, Chris Pannell. At this point, I want to recognize and acknowledge that the LitLive online reading series is hosted in Hamilton, Ontario, and that our events are part of the cultural life of a city built on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. I should also mention a few of the personal controls in Zoom so that you can modify your experience of the event. In the upper right corner, you'll see 2 buttons, the gallery view and the speaker view. Gallery view shows you all of the images of all the participants. And as more and more people join the meeting, the screen begins to resemble a checkerboard. Or if you know your old TV shows, this is also called the Brady Bunch view. The speaker view, as the name implies, shows you only the person who is speaking. As long as you're part of the meeting, you will always hear the audio, regardless of your visual display. Please use the audio controls of your computer to adjust the volume up and down. There's also a few useful buttons along the bottom of the active meeting window. The Start Stop Video button will display your active image to others. If you click on it, because for example, you need to step away for a minute or 2 and you don't want your computer to show us your empty room, you can put up a static image, perhaps your account avatar, and that's what others will see. To restart your active image, just click the Start Video button again. There's also a chat button at the bottom of the screen. When you click on it, a sidebar opens on the right-hand side where you can type in a question. As you type, your text appears at the bottom of the bar. It works much like a phone texting app or Facebook messaging. If you hit the return key on your keyboard, your text will be sent. If your question is for a reader, we will save the question to the end of the program and then read it aloud and spur some discussion. If you have a technical problem, please write your question in the chat sidebar and someone from our committee will try to help you via chat without interrupting the reading. Gary will look after any meeting-wide modifications that might be required. And please note that during the readings, the audience microphones will be muted. And of course, most of you know this, but if you wish to applaud, please hold up your hands and wave them like so, 2 hands, however you like. If you need to take a break, simply step away from your computer and we'll be waiting eagerly for your return. So that's my opening spiel. I'd like to bring on our first reader at this time. Let's begin with Ellen S. Jaffe. Ellen grew up in New York City, studied in England, and immigrated to Canada in 1979. After living in Hamilton for many years, she moved to Toronto in 2018. She's published 3 poetry collections titled Water Children, Skinny Dipping with the Muse, and most recently, The Day I Saw Willie Mays and Other Poems. She's also published a young adult novel, Feast of Lights, and a guide to writing, as well as poems and stories in journals and anthologies. Ellen has facilitated writing groups in schools and community organizations throughout Ontario. In Hamilton, with her colleague Lil Bloom, she organized 3 Canadian Jewish literary festivals. And she has received grants from the Ontario Arts Council for writing and arts education, as well as several literary awards. Please, let's have a warm welcome for Ellen Jaffe.
I'm unmuted, okay. So I'm unmuted, that's good.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, the whole LitLive committee, for bringing poetry back on this online version. It's really good to have poetry and prose to listen to. And I've read at LitLive in person several times, so this is kind of nice. And it's nice to see people from across the country here. It's one of the good things about an online reading. You can have friends from all over the States and across Canada, including some people I've just met recently via email. So I'm going to start with the title poem. Let's see if we can see this. The Day I Saw Willie Mays and Other Poems. It's hard to. And this came out in 2019. And I want to thank the Ontario Arts Council for giving me a writer's recommenders grant, and Guernica Press, who also recommended me for this, and also my friend and colleague Lil Bloom from Hamilton, who helped with the editing and publication. So the title poem is The Day I Saw Willie Mays, and that's about from growing up in New York. The book moves from my growing up to more poems about the world and politics and art, and then into the present day. And The Day I Saw Willie Mays comes from memory and also a childhood diary that validated a lot of those memories. So I'll try and, when I have the diary voice, I'll try and indicate that. The day I saw Willie Mays, the Say Hey Kid, play ball, I was 11 years old, May 15th, 1956, grade 6 trip recorded in my diary, which I still have years and moves later, its cracked blue cover tearing in my hands. Lunch with the hot dog, orange soda, Cracker Jack, Peter S. and I rode home together. The Giants, then in New York, were the home team, playing the Chicago Cubs. I rooted for the Cubs. New York girl, I'm not sure why. Maybe because the Giants weren't my Brooklyn Dodgers. But I noted the Giants won. Back then, I wouldn't have singled out any special players. Now I look up the game on Google, Giants 6, Cubs 4. Willie Mays hit a home run in the 4th inning. No one on base. No other names I recognize on the playlist. I never saw a ball game again until I moved near Toronto, cheered for the Blue Jays. Did I talk about this game with my father, who loved baseball? The diary doesn't tell me. We'd watch the Yanks and Dodgers on TV, play out a friendly rivalry. But family crises were brewing. My mother upset, stiff, sour. This makes me upset too, the diary says. My father tries to talk to her. I sobbed and sobbed. We were about to leave grade 6, the safety of grade school. I didn't know then what I was seeing, my mother's tears, sports legend in the making. The diary, like statistics, tells half the story. Both my parents gone now. No chance for a replay, but thinking about those times, I wish I could go back to the Polo Grounds, watch Willie Mays slam his home run over the outfield, over the wall. Ball hit so hard, it's never coming back. Thank you. So that was Willie Mays. Someone suggested I send it to him, which I may do. So my mother got over some of these crises she was having when I was 11, and she lived till she was 91, which is about 11 years ago. And this is a poem that from an incident a few years before she died, but I think I wrote it afterwards. My mother flew like a kite. And this is set in Hamilton. It's near Theatre Aquarius for people who know Hamilton. My mother flew like a kite. One windy November night, just past Halloween, my mother began to fly. We were going to see a play, Wuthering Heights, Storms of Nature and the Heart. As we walked from dinner to theater, a gust of wind swept her off her feet. My friend and I tried to hold her down, but she flew like a kite into the night sky, delicate bird with black cloth wings. She rose higher, higher, good witch crossing the face of the moon, bright bones lighter than air, entering the universe's dark matter, dark energy giving her power, until she slowly, slowly gravitated back to Earth, puzzled by the solid, wet pavement. It took her several years to try again and fly away. And the next one is a poem about my great-grandmother, who was a very nurturing figure to both my mother and myself. Thank you. And I've always liked that flying like a kite poem. So my great-grandmother came from Lithuania to New York in the 1880s with her family. But I always felt, if our family had stayed in Europe, we would have been caught up in the Holocaust. And as I say, she was very nurturing, and I remember her very well. My great-grandmother went to the movies. When life got too real to bear, my great-grandmother threw on her hat and coat and went to the movies, Lowe's Paradise on Grand Concourse. It happened one night. You can't take it with you. The Jazz Singer, Modern Times, even King Kong. She entered all these lives, these fairy tale lies that spoke to her heart, even though their language wasn't Yiddish. My mother told me the story, how her grandmother would storm out of the house, transport herself to a starrier, stranger world, then come home calm and comforted, ready to cook dinner. By the time I knew her, movies were long past, though she was still cooking and baking, growing houseplants on her windowsill, watching soaps on TV. I wish I'd spin with her in that darkened paradise, age 7 or 8, munching savory popcorn as we take in romance, adventure, glitter, even horror, holding hands at the scary parts. Maybe, seeing these images, she remembers or forgets being a child in Vodalke, Lithuania, circa 1882, a village she never talked about, lost and alien as worlds on the silver screen, scenes fading, flashing, frozen in her dreams. She would have liked that. And I have a couple of other ones in the book in her voice. I've imagined conversations she has with both with women at Ravensbrück concentration camp and just shopping in the supermarket and meeting Sarah from the Bible. So we're going to skip a little bit and go to a love poem, How Do Mermaids Make Love, in the voice of a mermaid. How do mermaids make love? Not carefully like porcupines, but oceanically in waves, our tails cleft open and shimmering, our silvery tongues sparkling. Waves of light and dark, pleasure, desire, intimations of destruction rising, falling like tides, swallowing everything in our wake. Wake and sleep to lullabies of the seas and the seasons. Yes, we are sirens, arousing you from the shallows of lethargy, luring you into the depths of imagination and dream. We fold you into the soft skeins of our silken skin, hold you so close, you can hear our heartbeats like shells against your ear, echoing in your own heart. We do not need to exchange tales and voices for legs, as our desperate sister did long ago in that old story. We swim with you into tidal waves of loneliness and love, carrying you from here to there, whispering and singing, working our sea changes to explore new worlds. There are no edges to fall off here, no monsters to get you, except the ones you create, the ones we can help you overcome. Come with us. Our world is round, watery, and full as the summer moon. In this book, thank you, my friend from university, who became a photographer Karen Rosenthal, who's I think listening here, she contributed a picture. She contributed the back cover picture, which is hard to see, but it's called Muse. And I have several poems in here, kind of a set of poems about her photographs, which are mainly bodies underwater. And it's called, the series is called Waves and Particles, and I'll read the poem about Muse. I'm a muse, skinny dipping, eyes and nipples staring up into the skin of sea and sky, blue as tears in memory. Or I'm a coral reef cast in the shape of a woman, a living island rippling and feathering into the water, floating, half submerged, beyond the reach of words, listening to my own music. You dream me on starry nights. You say I inspire you, but I need you too, so I can go on living. Okay, and now, let's see. There's another shift of gears. Here's a little poem I wrote for a girl in one of the children's groups that I used to teach. And that was a wonderful, all the teaching I did was wonderful, especially with children on reserves in Canada and in inner cities. And this is for a girl called Cynthia. And Cynthia was a name of Artemis, the Greek goddess, but this was an inner city child. Cynthia, not of the woods now, but city streets, where light is rare, and when it breaks, we look in wonder. And she had the most beautiful smile that was very rare. Okay, two more poems. This next one is, again, a change of pace. In the end of the book is a story called The Poet and the Executioner. And it's about a world, an alternative world, but probably not too different from ours. And it's a repressive society. And I started writing this story during the 2016 Republican Convention. And in this society, there's an executioner who's very good at his job. And the job involves executing people who have committed so-called thought crimes, art crimes, political crimes. It's not a nice society to live in. And even though he's good at this job, he suddenly discovers he can't do it anymore. His hand is trembling, he's sweating, he's shaking. And they send him away for rehabilitation. And they figure out a method where he can do art and writing, but it's safe somehow. Of course, we know this doesn't really work. And as he does more writing, he gets in touch with his humanity and his memories and realizes he's a poet. And during this process, he thinks of a poet whom he executed a few years before and writes to him. To a poet, I don't know your name. If I did once, it's gone now, like you, like your poems, written in invisible ink, on paper, on leaves and grass, on shirt sleeves and your lover's eyelids, etched on frost, melting on window panes, water and sand. Slices of thula bread you ate in a hurry, and the steam from your cups of moonberry tea. I wish I had read just one of your poems before pressing the switch of poison fire that buried your words and slowly, drop by drop, your life, letting you feel the loss and do nothing about it. I wish I did not have to think of you, wonder who you really were, instead of non-person X110782, or whatever your number was. I wish I was still deaf to your cries. I think we've all been discovering poetry is really important at this time, poetry and all the arts. And the last poem, again, is probably many of you know, some don't. I was diagnosed with cancer about 1.5 years ago, and the treatment is going really well, and I'm here. But when I was first diagnosed, I had no idea what would happen, and I didn't know how much time I'd have. And I wrote a series of poems in that sort of devastating few weeks before treatment started, called After the Diagnosis, and they really came in a rush. And it was interesting because as I wrote, they started in despair, but they often moved into some kind of hope and thoughts of the future. And this one is called Tumor, March 2019. It's written in the voice of the tumor. Tumor, March 2019. I lodged in your throat, esophagus to be precise, the place where you swallow food, make love, close to where you speak. Indigestible, but insidious, too small to cough up. I lurked there, biding my time, growing cell by cell by cell, burning your heart with my secret. Now you have found me, a bad dream come true. But you are stronger now, surrounded and filled with love and powerful words. I am exposed, open to treatment, to limitation. Remember your great-grandmother's saying, we'll fight it through. Don't choke, find the sweet spot. Give it all you've got. Hit me out of the ballpark. Come home safe to your life. Thank you.
Wow.
So that we're back to baseball again at the end of that. So thank you very much for listening. And I hope everybody stays safe.
Great. Thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you, Chris.
A moving reading, wonderful way to start our event tonight. Thank you. Next reader that we have is Laura Furster. Laura is a multidisciplinary writer and artist based in Hamilton, Ontario. She is the author of The Absence of 13, a book of poetry published by Mosaic Press. As well, she is a contributing columnist to the Hamilton Spectator. Laura's current projects in progress include a novel, her second poetry collection, and a series of gag cartoons. Let's have a nice, warm Zoom welcome for Laura Furster.
Hello. Hey guys. Thank you for having me. I'm going to try to fill 15 minutes, but to anyone who's ever read my poetry, you know that they're very short. So I'm going to try to pack a bunch of them in, and we'll see where we get to. This is the aforementioned book, The Absence of 13, that was published last year. So I'm just going to read from that. Street lamp. The street lamp, heavy hanging as a beehive, illuminates the dried rivulets of last summer's rainstorms. My lungs have shriveled, 2 rosebuds that failed to bloom, dried up like potpourri, only used now for decoration. I have no need for oxygen with this neon beehive outside my window and the insect-like hum of the refrigerator. How's my sound coming through?
Sounds
Good?
fine.
Perfect. Faults. It was an insidious game you played, teasing fate, leaving me to tow the faults, and your absence, falling fractured off shards of rock. You gestured grandly, granting me asylum from the wasteland in which I dwelt, but your words hung, strung up overhead, out of reach, linens on a clothesline, fabric weak from wear. Tomatoes. Puckering grape tomatoes, like little shrunken heads, shriek as their little souls escape. I cannot save them or the cancer-ridden loaf of bread on top of the microwave. They are merely casualties that had no business here in the first place. So everything I'm reading at this point is from the first half. Well, there are technically 3 sections to the book, but there's a distinct divide between the first section and the second section. So you may notice that they change their tune a little bit. I wonder if you can tell. So this is still the first section. Walls. A number of walls, surely fewer than 10, stand between us. We live in your compartment, and I in mine, and we share, in theory, the area in between, the vicinity around. This town is ours, yours and mine, but you and I move through conflicting space, negatively charged, the particles vibrating like trembling fingers. We collide infrequently, rarely with purpose. When we do, we meet like conductors. Your energy leaps like a spark trying to form a current, but the circuit remains slightly detached, only sometimes rattling closed with a jolt by accident. Ruined. It stretches its throat, head back laughing, amber eyes flashing. It wants me to see the mess it has made, the sinews, the unidentifiable glistening red masses spattered on the concrete walls. It wants me to see what it has done with my body, now ruined in pieces on the floor. I don't know how I'm gonna fill 15 minutes. Seth. Even when the moon eclipses the sun, a halo remains, against which the moon appears black. The pallid moon can only be seen without comparison in the borrowed glow of the godlike sun. He is the sun and you are the moon, sickly pale as an underworld dweller. Like Seth, you rise when the sun sets to burn by trickery in a hijacked bath of rays, basking like a false king. You are ever present, but you appear only to the eye at night when the sun's light wanes. To be honest, I think you could probably read my whole book in 15 minutes. All right. Amber. Happiness makes for dull poetry. This is what I must conclude as I sit in the amber lit loft space of a cafe across from an amber-haired man, sculpted as a marble statue, who reads a book, sharing at intervals the passages that excite him. His beer is amber as well, as are the planks of glossy wood that form the vaulted ceiling of the cafe. It seems also to be the color of my thoughts, warm and viscous, clogging the passages through which my despairing words usually travel. If you guessed that that was the beginning of the second half, or the second section, then you would be correct. These are a little less dark. Although this poem is literally called Eclipse, so that's pretty dark, but it's the good kind. Eclipse. You arrived as an eclipse, and everything sharpened in the cool dark. The trees bared their bones, the delicate fingers curved, and the birdsong dissolved, leaving clean silence. Catastrophes. Small catastrophes. Here, a miniature tornado uproots some shrubbery. Here, lightning has sliced open the sky, revealing finite unity. Minor perils wound the surface, which is left with scars that wane, turn from purple to near colorless, sometimes only visible in their texture. Radioactive. The sky is the color of overcooked egg yolk, a visual cue to the reek of a city that I can't help but adore. Being here in this free hotel room, in an airport utopia, draped in a man's musked t-shirt, hunched over a New York-style pizza, even though this is New Jersey. The unnaturally colored sky instills no distaste, with a pizza nearly as expansive as the oversized bed, and a spare white shirt hung by the ironing board. Parade of lights. Boats ghost the water, only visible from a distance by colored lights that hover in strings. Skeletons bound in the glow of lost souls. They do this every Labor Day, they say, the captains of this midnight armada. It's called the Parade of Lights. In our unadorned craft, we drift alongside, the glug of motors slowed to a crawl, only punctuated by the greeting of neighbors. They are mostly decorated in Christmas lights, though one boat is dressed for Halloween. Humming. He took my hand and said, "We've got to get out of here." A Sunday, the sex clubs closed by 10, and red-lit windows framing unclaimed bodies. We hit the cobblestone, no eyes for sirens, and took a winding ride back to our room. Door locked, a humming softness sunk us to the floor. Good times in Amsterdam. I'm actually timing myself, so I'm gonna see where I am. Okay. We're okay now. I was surprised to be notified that she had liked my comments on a post by our only mutual friend, her ex-girlfriend, who always posts funny things and whom I've been meaning to visit in the States one time or another. It was the first contact we'd had in about 6 years, since our rather cool falling out, she too being a one-time lover of mine from an old triangle of blurry line friendships. So a few days later, I returned the like by way of her comment on same ex-girlfriend's not same post, and so, I suppose in that way, we're okay now. Sorry, I'm so fixated looking down, I'm not even looking at your beautiful clap hands. That is in fact you. It is quite a transcendent experience being told about yourself, as per a mythology that has grown into its own beast in your absence. Your fleshly existence is not even required for this very real version of you to breathe fire onto the rooftops of a village that trembles in the shade of a terrible creature that is in fact you, in case you didn't realize it. Okay, I will probably not hit 15 minutes unless you want me to just go back to the beginning and cycle through some more, which I don't mind doing. Yeah, why not? I'll take up as much time as I can, but I'll keep moving forward for now. So this is the title poem, The Absence of 13. We didn't move far, 7 floors actually, from the 19th to the 11th, which is 7 if you consider the absence of 13. But now, instead of bird-eye angle specks of people, which one could think susceptible to a light finger brush as flecks of cigarette ash on a couch, we find ourselves stationed in the worming innards of the city, which sometimes has its shoulders warmed by the hands of the sun, and sometimes has its lights on or off, and sometimes has a plastic bag stuck to the bottom of its shoe, and sometimes wails in pain, and sometimes smiles. All right, I am going to, oh, another one queued up, okay. Black Bear. On the lake in summertime, the docks are crowded with leashed vessels and people drinking beer and liquor, reclining, laughing into dusk. Black water slaps the hard shells of boats, ripples of silver traced by moonlight, and loons loose their mating trill. After late dinner, we shuffle cards on the love-worn wooden table in the old cottage, light a fire, smoke a hash pipe, crack a bottle, share secrets as a black bear, unseen, prowls in our minds. All right. Now, I'm going to read my very tiny, I always say that my book is in 2 halves because I always forget the little joke, my own little inside joke, which is my haiku section. I'm not historically a haiku writer. I just started writing them one day when something funny happened. So I kind of tacked on this little extra section in the back. The first one is called Almost Appetizer. And this was the first one I wrote. Baked brie dish slipping from gripless oven mitt hand, upside down heartbreak. Beast revered. Fine as spider's silk, a halo surrounding you, immaculate beast. Phone distractions. Intrusive phone sounds, hot-blooded text rants of an egomaniac. Morning cat tread. Paws probe my organs, unearthly gravitation, tenderizing flesh. No fucks. Hopefully there are no children here. I apologize if there are. Elementary manipulation tactics, no fucks are given. Candid moments. I love you, baby. Candid moments travel through thin apartment walls. On track. Keeping nights on track like steering a shopping cart with a wonky wheel. And finally, morning lovers. Hours passed in laughter, hangover euphoria of morning lovers. And I think I'll end it there.
Okay.
Thank you so much to all the LitLive folks and to everybody who tuned in. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you.
Laura Furster reading from The Absence of 13. And that book came out last year from Mosaic Press. And in a minute, we'll post a link to the publisher's website. We're gathering some great comments on both of our readers so far. And I'll pop in a sales link here and there, or a link to a publisher's website for those who are interested in following up on the books that they're hearing from tonight. So thank you again, Laura. We're going to take an intermission at this point in time. And Ben Robinson, I'm sure, is getting ready to give us a musical interlude. And it's a chance for us to look at the chat, maybe take a little break, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. And for those who are going to hang around, I'll see you very shortly. Thank you very much, Ben. Another first for LitLive. Music at the intermission. You've made an auspicious start here for us. Thank you. Thanks again. At this point, I'd normally bore the audience with some special announcements. I don't really have a special announcement at hand here, except to say that this is the first time we've done this as a committee, and I think for some of us as individuals too. And if you have any suggestions, of course, please put them into the chat in terms of how we might make things easier for you, the audience, and those of you who are writers as well. We're not above taking some criticism, and we want to make each LitLive as satisfying as it can be for everyone. And that's I noticed the chat side is being used much more than I ever dreamed it would be, and that's great. I'm really glad to see all the comments coming from the audience towards the writers. It's added another dimension entirely to what we're doing here. And so, without any further chat from me, let's bring on our next writer. His name is Richard Kelly Kemick. He's an award-winning poet, journalist, and fiction writer. His most recent nonfiction book, I Am Herod, takes readers backstage and undercover at one of the world's largest religious events. Published by Goose Lane Editions and nominated for the Writers Guild of Alberta's 2020 Nonfiction Award. Of this book, the jury said, quote, I Am Herod is a delightfully funny page turner and feels refreshingly new. The book looks at belief, how we understand those who are unlike us, how we navigate truth and lies among the circus and spectacle of everyday life. Richard Kemick presently lives in Rosslyn, British Columbia, but through the miracle of the internet, he's here with us tonight. Please, a warm welcome for Richard Kemick.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. It's a real treat to be here. Thank you very much to LitLive for organizing this and kind of persevering through this bizarre time. It really means a lot. And also thank you to the other authors this evening. It's just lovely to be hearing your readings, and I look forward to Saleema's as well following me. Okay, you know what? It's actually this is my first online reading, and it's so nice that I can see all of your names. It's like a normal reading, but with name tags. So I can just say, hi, Rita, how are you doing? Hello, Andrea's iPhone. Rita, yeah, what's going on? Okay. Anyways, before I just start reading all of your names out loud, I should look at the book. Okay, so just a little bit of background. There's a town in southern Alberta called Drumheller. Some of you may know it. It's the dinosaur capital of the world, which is, you know, a bit self-congratulatory. But there are a lot of dinosaurs there. They're also famous for having one of the world's largest passion plays, which is a play about the life and death of Christ. And okay, when you think of passion play, whatever you're thinking about this play right now, times it by like 1 trillion. It is huge. It takes place in an outdoor amphitheater that seats just under 3,000 people. And there's chariot races and pyrotechnics and sword fighting. And I was just so taken by the fact that this play happens and has been happening for about 25 years now, every year in the desert, to varying degrees of acclaim, that I thought like, oh, that might be fun to write about. So I joined the play. Sorry, I should also mention that I'm not religious. That's key. I should have started with that. I'm not religious, but I wanted to join the play. I wanted to see how it worked on like a logistical or like financial level, but then also on like an artistic and emotional level as well. Okay, so I think I've covered up. Oh yes, the character that I was cast in I was cast in the role of Herod, who nobody really knows about, yes, Liz. Yeah, okay, big Herod fan. That's great. Nobody, I did go to Catholic school as a kid. I didn't really know who Herod was. Uh, Not a lot of people in the play knew who he was. People always confused him with King Tut, which has never made sense to me, but it happened all the time, all the time. Someone in the costume department said I should have one of those conical goatees, which anyways, that's not important. I'm Herod. Herod, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like one of the bad guys of the Old Testament. He basically abandons Jesus to crucifixion. Like he's the governor of the region and he can intercede, but he doesn't. And he's kind of like the Bond villain of the New Testament. So I was Herod. Okay. I think that's it. Oh no, sorry. Couple more. Sorry. Couple more things. All actors, the cast is like 100 and some people. All actors are volunteer. And we rehearse all summer and we camp in this abandoned baseball diamond with an outhouse, and then which is right by the amphitheater that we rehearse in. With the exception of a couple actors, Jesus and Gabriel and Jesus' understudy make money. They make a bit of cash, but basically everyone else is volunteer. Okay, so in the book, I refer to people by their their character names. So Judas is Judas, Jesus' understudy, etc. There's a few exceptions. Barrett and Jessica are the co-directors, and Vance is the executive director who kind of like runs the whole show. If you right now close your eyes and think of a man named Vance who lives in the desert and runs a multi-million-dollar Christian organization, you have nailed it. You have Vance in your head right now. Very, very much a character. Okay, so in this scene, we're the actors, they drank. Which I was shocked and thrilled by. So after each rehearsal, we would kind of go to the local bar, which is named O'Shea's. It is a shithole. No, I loved it there every minute, but if you're ever in Drumheller, don't feel the need to go. Okay. In O'Shea's, Abel, Judas, Pilate, and I take a corner booth. The rosewood darkens the room, and moonlight strains through a stained glass window of a unicorn. Flat screens overlook the bar, each one tuned to the same sports channel. One of the former Passion Play actors is featured in a commercial, and our conversation is interrupted whenever this ad comes on because Pilate punches the table and curses the actor's name. Pilate is also in the budding stages of his own acting career that he's trying to launch into outside of the Passion Play. Judas and Abel have each ordered a burger and water. Pilate has ordered a double gin and tonic and a Cobb salad since he is trying to squeeze into his armor. He was a bit pudgy. I have ordered a beer, the bottle's label peeled off and curling onto the tabletop. Okay, sorry, just a quick thing. The script of the year I was in was based on the Gospel of Luke, which is by far the most boring gospel of the four. And a large part of that is that it starts with this thing called the genealogy sequence, which basically is like just a list of all the patriarchs between Adam, the first person, and Jesus. You'd think the script would just cut that, but they wanted to include it. So it turned into this kind of bizarre weaving of like interpretive dance and stage combat and a little bit of stage magic. It went just terribly, but I loved it. It was fun. I had a great time, but it went quite poorly. Almost all of the male actors in the play were double cast in the genealogy sequence as well. Okay, that genealogy sequence, Pilate says, it's a fucking death march. The audience is gonna shit themselves out of boredom. In response to the genealogy ensemble's inability to remember our choreography, our dance sequence has become less an artistic exploration of the ordinance of God demonstrated throughout human history and more of an exploration of two-dimensional shapes. What was once an elaborate montage of interpretive dance has become six minutes of 22 men shuffling in and out of various triangles, semicircles, and rectangles. Our choreography is now reminiscent of a North Korean military parade, yet with neither the precision nor the fervor. Our singing has been cut as well, replaced with a recording that plays over the loudspeaker. It was supposed to be a song, but we were all the world's worst singers. All we have to do is say our names in 2 beats of 4/4 time while continuing our assembly of shapes. But this simple instruction is complicated by the fact that most biblical names are multisyllabic: Zerubbabel and Methuselah, Malaleel and Arphaxad. Abel, who is only in the first 45 seconds of the sequence before being murdered by his brother and forgotten for the entirety of the show, points a finger at Pilate. "If they cut any more of my stage time," he says, "I'll be the one to kill somebody." But Pilate waves him off. "At least you don't have to deal with a fucking red curtain following around you like some shitty ghost." Since Pilate's and my scenes often come one right after the other, the design department has recently crafted and debuted what is known as the wall. The wall is a long strip of heavy cloth, approximately 1.5 meters tall by 4 meters wide, and is held up by teenage bannermen. When Pilate is on stage, the wall shows Roman red, except it's more of a metallic scarlet. When Pilate exits and I enter, the bannermen rotate the wall counterclockwise for it to show what is presumably my palatial wallpaper. Several different shades of gold adorned with burgundy tassels as large as a child's severed arm. Pilate and I hate the wall. In fact, we loathe the wall so much that we have bonded over it. Not only does it look like, to quote Pilate, a heap of human shit, but the most spectacular part about the play is the set itself. And to obscure it with a cheap bolt of fabric reverses the gravitas of our scenes, giving them a distinct sideshow quality, something unpacked from a caravan and performed at a state fair for the local farmers and ne'er-do-wells. Furthermore, the bannermen, who are homeschooled, have not built up the muscle mass that unrelenting bullying encourages. So each time there's a gust of wind, the bannermen's bird-boned arms prove no match for Mother Nature, forcing me to flee my palace mid-scene as I sense the walls literally closing in. The waitress delivers our food, including Pilate's Cobb salad. He scoops up the chicken and bacon and shovels it into his mouth. Mid-chew, he asks Judas how he and the Virgin Mary are doing since their breakup. Judas and the Virgin Mary were going out, and it was a big deal, but then they broke up, which was a bigger deal. Judas stirs his ice water. We're being polite and not really talking. It doesn't help that she is one of Barrett's students and worships him. Barrett teaches theater at a private Christian university in Calgary the rest of the year. According to Judas, who is currently studying at the same university to become a youth minister, Barrett has acquired a small but fervent following within the department, a following that affords him a papal infallibility. "I'm trying to be human," Judas says, "but Barrett wants me to be a cartoon. And no matter how many times I tell him that my line, 'My name is Judas, son of Iscariot,' is wrong because Iscariot is where I'm from and not who my dad is, all he says is," Judas adopts a computer monotone, "the line is what it is." Barrett, oh, just bless him. There were a lot of big personalities within the cast, and Barrett understandably responded to this by not having a personality. That sounds like he was the emotional anchor of the cast. He took a lot of shit. Okay. He adopts a computer monitor. The line is what it is. At least you have lines, Abel says. Judas grinds the heel of his hands into his eyes. My dad's name is Simon. The commercial break comes back on, and Pilot calls the actor a dick snatcher and feigns throwing his fedora at the TV. The waitress behind the bar ducks and then rises tentatively. She laughs nervously, which makes all of us laugh awkwardly, and I exploit the lapse of conversation. What happened to the old Martha of Bethany? Okay, sorry, quick note. There was an actor, she played the role of Martha of Bethany, which is like a fine role. It's no Herod, but it's a fine role. She was great, she was really nice, but then she kind of disappeared quite suddenly from rehearsal, and I couldn't get a straight answer as to why. So I kind of spent the summer piecing this disappearance together. For a while, it seems like the squeaking of silverware will be my answer. Abel says his real-life wife is friends with the old Martha of Bethany, so he knows but won't say. Pontius Pilate says he knows too, but talking about it will just get him upset. Judas stares at his ice water. These goddamn directors, Pilate says, and their drive to destroy the entire fucking community. Abel says, but she did something like this before, in a shopping mall. Sure, Pilate says, and if she did this in any other place, it would make sense to toss her, but not fucking here. But what would we do if she did that during a show, Judas asks. We would fucking work with it, Pilate says. To see Barrett turn his back on her hurts me so much. When I first arrived at the Passion Play, I was a loud, rambunctious, outspoken 10-year-old, and the directorial team had a hard time reining me in. But rather than kicking me out, they wrote in a role that utilized what I was bringing. And that is why, to this day, the script includes demon-possessed boy. I glance at Judas, whose face has welled with such redness that I think him about to cry. The waitress comes by and says they're doing last call. But you boys don't really drink, she says. Oh, I drink, Pilate assures her, but not with these pansies. Then, for good measure, he orders another double gin. Abel, who is currently applying for admission into Calgary's police academy, asks, aren't you driving? Fuck you, Pilate responds. The commercial comes back on, and Pilate, revolted, shoves his Cobb salad into the middle of the table, the meat all gone, the lettuce never touched. Thank you once again for having me. That was really nice. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Richard. Very dynamic reading. I would have liked to have heard how that scene ended, but I guess I'll have to buy the book. And I'm sure some book information will be coming up on the chat very shortly. And our fourth reader of the evening is Saleema Nawaz. Saleema is the author of 2 novels, most recently Songs for the End of the World, which came out from McClellan & Stewart in trade paperback approximately a week ago. There's a bit of a story about the publication schedule for this book and how it was changed as a consequence of the pandemic in March. Saleema's first novel, Bone and Bread, won the Quebec Writers Federation Paragraph Hugh McClellan Prize for Fiction and was a finalist for the 2016 Canada Reads competition. She is also the author of the short story collection Mother Superior, and Saleema has won the Writers' Trust of Canada McClellan Stewart Journey Prize. Born and raised in Ottawa, Saleema currently lives in Montreal. She's with us here today. Please give a warm welcome for Saleema Nawaz.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Yay, great. Well, thank you so much to everyone at LitLive for inviting me, and thank you to the other readers and everyone at home listening. It's so nice to be with you all in this virtual space, and it feels really like nourishing to hear everybody's work. It's been a great night. So I'm going to read a little bit from Songs for the End of the World, which is actually the first time I'm reading from it. I've done a couple of events for the book, but I haven't actually read anything from it before. So it's about a bunch of interconnected characters who are living through the opening weeks and months of a novel coronavirus pandemic. And so I'm going to read a little bit from one of the sections of a character named Emma. So Emma and Stu are husband and wife. They're part of a sort of famous indie rock band from Austin, Texas. And I think the only other things you need to know is that so the virus in the novel is called Aramis, which stands for acute respiratory and muscular inflammatory syndrome. And there's also a character in the novel called Aramis Girl, who is this young woman who's presumed to have been at the first infection site and who people tried to track down, but couldn't. And so as a result, she's sort of become infamous just sort of through the weirdness of internet memes and stuff like that. So this section is Emma, September 2020. Emma slipped her hand into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Reflexively, she snapped a photo of the half-deserted terminal and sent it to her sister. Surprise upside of terrifying worldwide epidemic, no epic lineups to get through airport security. She and Stu and their bandmates were waiting in a newly designated pre-screening area as 6 ceiling-mounted monitors tuned to the same news network flashed synchronously high above. In a couple of hours, they would be flying into Canada by special dispensation to headline an Aramis benefit concert in Vancouver. It was only a few weeks ago that Emma was lying on the couch in front of the television saying, "Aramis sounds like something nice to catch, much less disgusting than swine flu." Stu was on the rug playing with an old theremin he'd found at the Salvation Army and repaired with the help of how-to guides on the internet. They should name all the flu variants the way they do hurricanes. His hand cut through the air above the theremin and a hypnotic sound thrummed across the room. They're like the chorus of a song, the way they come around every year. It would sound like a much friendlier way to die, getting killed off by Flu Henrietta or Flu Kevin. Back then, she'd laughed. Now she checked her phone for a response from Domenica, though the time difference made it unlikely. Her sister had moved halfway around the world and married a man named Ahmad, who was actual oil royalty from the UAE, and with whom she had 2 little girls, Aaliyah and Layla. Emma and Dom communicated mainly via text, or more frequently these days, highly staged photos with annotated emoji reactions. "Looking up baby names?" asked Jesse. He's one of their bandmates. "I nominate Jessica." Ben shook his head. Way too 80s. "This may come as a shock," said Emma, "but you guys actually don't get a vote on this." Stu grinned and leaned over to place a gentle palm on her belly. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "What did the doctor say?" Stu was tender, careful with her these days. The baby was precious cargo, and Emma was the courier, the protective packaging. She was the styrofoam peanuts. No matter how close they were, the baby was between them. "The baby is fine," said Emma. At least, the baby had been fine at last week's appointment. But this morning, while Stu assumed she was enduring the clinic's usual battery of tests, the premier tattoo artist in Texas had looked at her stomach like it was a dude who had cut in front of him in line. "Absolutely no way," he'd said from behind the counter, and he shook his head so minutely it was as though he didn't want to give her anything. Not a tattoo, not an apology, not an inch. "It's just too risky for the baby," he said, crossing his arms. Each one sported a forked-tongued, scaly dragon licking its way down the back of his hand. "You've got the risk of preterm labor, risk of infection, and pregnant women's skin is different, more elastic. It holds more water. So there's a question of the quality of the tattoo. Stretch marks, scarring." Emma suspected that tattoo artists liked saying no because they were the last people on earth that anybody expected to have limits, especially tattoo artists with tattoos on their faces. Yet she had apparently found a line that this leather-wrapped, forehead-pierced professional with 2 symmetrical cheek tattoos and a handlebar mustache was unwilling to cross. And then the baby had kicked up its feet into her side, as if in celebration of her disappointment. Emma knew it was a morbid streak inherited from her mother that made her want to follow through on major life decisions before heading out on a journey. During the years her family had sailed around the world, at every port of call, her mother had tried to take care of all the serious business that had occurred to her as their boat lurched in the horrific swells of some Pacific storm. That was what Emma wanted, to take care of the serious business of defacing her God-given temple before the baby came to do it for her. Plus, if anything ever happened to her, they'd be able to identify her body. You sure you don't think it's too risky? Stu asked now. Did the doctor say anything about flying at 7 months? It'll be fine, she said, glancing down at her phone so he wouldn't see her face, unsure of what expression he would read there. If she was too afraid or not enough. Aramis seemed distant and far-fetched compared to the more pressing concerns of a feeble bladder and broken sleep. The truth was that Emma already felt as though she'd contracted an affliction that was wreaking havoc on her body and mind. But Aramis was alarming enough that there were travel advisories in place. The EU, Mexico, and the United States had gone so far as to ban their citizens from traveling to and from China. In retaliation, China had called for certain debts to be repaid, and the President of the United States of America had gone on television and tried very hard not to say that his country couldn't quite afford to buy enough antivirals for everyone who might need them. The media, however, had no compunctions about spelling it out. Sales of guns and generators were through the roof all over the country, even as the overcrowded American ICUs reported a survival rate above 60% for adults, a statistic that Emma did not find altogether comforting. They had no comparable data for children, who by and large remained comatose. But so far there had been no cases reported in Canada, or in Austin for that matter. Emma waited a beat before turning to grin at Stu. Besides, the doctor said I needed more freedom in my life, and more fun. He actually recommended a tattoo. Can you believe it? Just wait a few months until the baby's born, said Stu, wrapping his arms around her waist. He leaned in and smelled her hair. And who knows, you might change your mind by then. When have you ever known me to change my mind? He laughed. You're right. You're an abominably obstinate woman. Thank you. When Emma glanced up at the TVs again, the news was airing another story about New York City's so-called Aramis girl. Oh, I want to see this, she said. Stu patted her hand as they listened to pundits speculate about how many people Aramis girl might have infected. She's an example of a broken public health authority, an analyst from a Washington think tank was saying. Emma stared at the now familiar photo of the smiling girl, frozen in time before her face and life got blown up out of all proportion. I feel so bad for her, she said, watching the rabid discussion of Aramis girl's possible movements. Emma tried to imagine the downsides of sudden fame without any of the perks. She must be scared stiff. If she's even still alive, said Stu. The program switched to a conversation about infection avoidance and an interview with one of the station's new commentators, the writer of a best-selling pandemic novel. He appeared on screen via a low-quality video feed. Oh my God, said Stu, sounding oddly vehement. This guy, can't they find an actual expert? Or is real science taboo now? Emma squinted at the TV. Why is he so grainy? Because he's Skyping in from home. He's saying we should all stay inside too. Easier said than done. A few months earlier, Emma had read the writer's novel, in which all of the world's children caught a deadly virus and died. At the time, it had seemed preposterous. The baby began a fury of kicking. Maybe we ought to call someone, said Stu. He rested his hand on her belly again, his eyes watching the ticker at the bottom of the news program as it tracked the confirmed number of cases of Aramis worldwide. Let them know we want in on the special secret bunker for the rich and famous. Ha. Don't worry about Aramis, said Emma. Believe me, I'm not going to. And that's where I'm going to stop. It was a little shorter than I thought it would be, but thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Saleema. That was too short a portion, but thank you very much for joining us. And your book is quite extraordinary for its prescience, and I understand the amount of research that went into it was took you several years. I'm referencing the Globe and Mail article, of course, and perhaps I'm trying to segue into the chat already, but I'll just stop here and say thank you very much. I'm sure that the audience will have some questions for you and for our other writers. And yes, I am trying to segue to the next portion of our here. I would like to thank Ellen as Jaffe, Lauren Furster, Richard Kelly-Kernick, and Saleema Nawaz for their readings tonight. They've really made our initial Zoom get-together something very memorable, and we're grateful for their time and their books that they've brought with them. At this point, Christine, are you there?
Yes, I am, Chris.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So, as you all know, this is our first time doing a online reading. And so we had thought that we would do a Q&A at the end, and then I would facilitate it through questions typed in the chat area. So let's give that a try. If you have a question for any of the readers, feel free to type your question into the chat area. Make sure, if it's a question, it could be a question for all of the readers or a specific reader, and just note that in your question, and I'll keep my eyes on it, and I'll read those questions for the reader, for the readers. So anyone out there have a question? And this is also a brand new, aside from this being our first virtual reading, doing a Q&A is also brand new for us at LitLive. So we'll see how it goes.
I have a question.
Okay.
If I can.
And do you want to, I also thought that instead of typing it, maybe we can just say it. I mean, there's not very many of us. So go ahead, Saleema.
Okay, thank you. This is a question for Richard. I was curious if you heard it, got any feedback from the theater company or any of the actors or anyone involved in that organization after your book came out, and what they thought about it.
Like, what did Jesus have to say?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jesus now lives in LA and is doing quite well for himself. Yeah, thank you very much for your question, Saleema. Reaction was mixed, but I will say, like, it was, there's a writer I really admire, and I was talking to him about when I was kind of halfway through the first draft of the book, and was kind of pitching him the angle and just how things were going, and he was emphatic that I shouldn't, like, kind of the first thing he said was that you can't make fun of anyone. And I really took that to heart, and that I wrote the book with the idea that, like, anything I write here, I should be able to read to an audience knowing that those people are in the room. And yeah, so with that in mind, I made some really good friends. I actually, the guy who played Pontius Pilate, him and I just got a drink the other day. It's a few years now since I've been in the play. Him and I got a drink the other day, and then I still talk to a few others. So those in the play who I became good friends with, it was definitely important to me on, like, professional and personal level, what they thought, how accurate of a representation I was able to bring to the summer. There are other folks in the play who weren't as big of fans of it, but I understand where they're coming from too. Like, I definitely stand with whatever. Simon Peter indiscriminately bullied me all summer. Anyways, I air a few grievances in the book. And yeah, so, like, he wasn't the biggest fan of that. Yeah. But I don't know, it's just life. So anyways, Saleema, sorry, to answer your question, I would say it's been okay, like, pro and con. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Saleema, and thank you, Richard. Any other questions from anyone out there? So
Yeah.
again, feel free to type them, or you could just say, Ellen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I wanted to ask Saleema, what gave you the idea for the novel, since it was written, you started it several years before this current pandemic?
Yeah, there were kind of two impulses. One was that I had all these sort of characters and short stories, like unpublished short stories, and I was trying to think of something that I could bring them all together, because I liked these characters. I wanted to do something with them, and a virus is something that brings can bring the whole world together and apart. So that was one element. The other element was just this sense of being drawn to certain kinds of disaster stories, but feeling that they didn't really accurately reflect, you know, the usual experience of a disaster. Like they're so sensational, they're so kind of like, they tend to be kind of like Hollywood, like giant, like The Day After Tomorrow or something like that. And I wanted something that was a bit more hopeful and also kind of got to kind of the everyday, like realistic experience of what that would be like.
More personal in some ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. It reminds me of the Decameron, where people long ago that people were all gathered from the plague and telling stories. So it's like that kind of personal and the disaster.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a long tradition of plague stories for sure.
Thank you. Good reading. Interesting book.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I have a question, which I guess maybe for Saleema and for Richard and for either Ellen or Laura too. I was interested in how using humor to address serious issues or as part of it. It can be it could be easy to say, well, a virus, one has to be very very serious about it because it's so, it's people's lives, and similarly it's about the Gospels and Passion and Jesus. You have to be very serious and grim, or health concerns in your work. Ellen, so just, I don't know if anybody would like to talk about addressing humor and how that is a useful technique aside from being enjoyable.
I have a comment that came from one of our Jewish literary festivals, something I didn't write, but I can't remember the person who wrote it, but it was about the polio epidemic in Toronto in the 50s. And it was funny. It was about a boy, and how his family was reacting to this epidemic. And people were laughing. I mean, it was serious, but it was funny. And then a woman said, well, how can you joke about this serious thing? And he said, well, if we didn't laugh, then we'd be crying. And humor can, if we sit in many cultural kinds of humor or personal humor, you make something funny because then you can get into it. You can bring people into it in a way, in a different way, makes it kind of opens the door. And there is humor. I mean, we have to laugh at some things.
Absolutely.
I when I was writing, I was really taken by the play of how earnest it is on one hand, like that. I something I really enjoyed and really took a lot kind of as a writer away from it was how invested people are in the play, and that they also are better versed than anyone, aware of their own shortcomings. I don't know, and then to me was just like both heartbreaking and empowering, and something that really drew my interest, and I think culminated in a lot of humor. Yeah, I don't know, Gary, if I may add on to your question for the other writers, if you, I don't know, what I loved about actors in the play was that how invested they were in the final production, even knowing that there was elements of it that were just unbelievably dangerous when it came to stage combat. For the other writers, like what's your relationship, if I may ask, with your work as it kind of progresses through those stages as well? Like Laura, what's your relationship with your poems as they progress?
My relationship with them as they progress.
Yeah.
I don't really know if I know how to put that into words. They tend to come out really quickly and suddenly. I mean, as the subject matter itself tends to be like capturing a brief moment or feeling, they also tend to kind of come out that way. So I don't know. I think there's sort of like a hybrid of like, it's all very, very deliberate and controlled, and at the same time flows almost like its own entity. I think that's the best way I can answer that question. It's not, it's yeah, I think that's all I can really say. Yeah, thanks for asking me though.
I guess I could answer two things. I like revising. I mean, sometimes I'll have a draft of a poem, it isn't quite right, and then when you revise, you find the missing image or the right word or the better word that seems to fit. It's like putting a piece of a puzzle. And that's one thing. And then sometimes poems, like, you'll still be thinking about them for a long time. Sometimes they come quickly, and sometimes you have to think about it for a long time, and then it will come. And I like reading poems aloud, because then you get more of a sense of how people respond to that. So there's kind of the writing, and then when doing a reading, you get a different sense of how the poem sounds and how it reaches out to people.
Yeah, I think incubation is a kind of a key term in poetry for sure. Like when it comes out, it's kind of its own beast, kind of charging forward. But sometimes, yeah, like that there have been topics or events or relationships that I've thought about for long periods of time, knowing that I will eventually kind of put something down. But sometimes it takes months or honestly even years to address even the, certain topics, or, the tiniest little thing that you're just not ready to address yet. So yeah, I do a lot of incubating, thinking about things, but kind of thinking about them like in the periphery and letting them become themselves in their own time.
Yeah, that's a good word. Incubating is good, but sometimes some political poems I've written that or just observations come really quickly. And as you say, other things you're not ready to write about for a long time, or something happens and then it triggers, you remember some other thing, and then they connect. I've had poems like that, and that's interesting. When these events, a new event, oh yeah, I remember that other event, and then they can come together, and they're sort of greater than each thing in itself. They make a whole, whereas you couldn't write about one or the other separately.
Yeah, experience. I think that's been one of the hardest things as a writer through the pandemic, is everything we experience contributes to, all those little puzzle pieces kind of coming together. So it's been hard not being able to go out and talk to people, and like having that eureka moment where something you've been sort of ruminating on just goes off in its own direction. Yeah, that's been a struggle for me. I don't know about anybody else, but maybe, I don't know if anyone else wants to touch on what it's been like as a writer in the pandemic. For me, it's been difficult. It's been something that it should seem obvious that you have all this time on your hands. You can't go to the bar, you're not going to see your friends, you're not going shopping, all these things that we distract ourselves with. But it's really, and actually that's something that my next column touches on, is how difficult it's been to not have access to all the things that inspire us. Going out and talking to people, going to establishments, all the random things that you don't expect to encounter on any given day, but might just trigger something for you. So for me, it's been a bit of a struggle, and I have not utilized my time the way I wish I could have.
I'm mostly shocked that I wasn't going anywhere anyway, so it wasn't actually much different. So I just that was a shocking realization to me,
It just highlighted the stall, did it?
Yeah, it's just...
That's what happened to me. I was already heading towards a bit of a dip, and then the pandemic was like, hey, you suck.
Well, Saleema, maybe this is an obvious question, but what would you, knowing something about this pandemic, what would you have done in your book that you, now that you know about this pandemic, you would have added to your pandemic? I haven't read your book, so I don't know yet. But what would you have added from what your perspective now?
That's a great question, because I part of me, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I was still seeing it through that lens of like, oh, this is stuff that I could have used, like I could have used this, but of course
Yeah.
I finished it. The text was finalized before the pandemic happened. So, there was interesting, the stuff about how suddenly the air became so much cleaner because the cars stopped and sort of wildlife returning to places. I mean, in my novel, it's less of a immediate global lockdown. Like it's much more gradual. It's almost kind of like more like where we are now, where it's sort of like people are kind of trying to keep on with their daily lives, but with these sort of mitigations. So yeah, my novel doesn't have that kind of complete lockdown, but that kind of stuff, and just things that I didn't think about, like organized sports, like seeing like what the NBA is doing, the NHL, and that's really interesting, like an interesting question. And some of the economic questions I didn't really get into because they weren't as interesting to me, but yeah, all the sort of struggling businesses and sort of just different arenas of life that I've been like, oh wow, that I just didn't.
In a way that shows the difference between writing fiction and writing nonfiction. I mean, fiction, you just have there's a different way of looking at things. So I think that's okay. You didn't have to cover everything that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. It's all fiction, but it's still interesting.
Oh, go ahead, Gary.
I was thinking I'll be interested in the kinds of, so it's fascinating to write a novel about a pandemic, but I'm also, I'd be interested in novels that talk about that period after a pandemic and how we adjust, because it's, who knows what the world is going to look like in a year or 2 years. It seems like really an interesting thing for fiction to explore.
All right, and I just wanted to piggyback on that question for Saleema. Can you take us back to the moment and your reaction? And you may have already sort of touched on this, but when COVID-19 began to unfold in March, and you knowing that you had this forthcoming novel about a pandemic and that it had many similarities, like just what did you feel? What did you think when that was happening? How surreal?
Yeah, it was super surreal. And I guess it wasn't just in March. So I would say probably the first time I had a conversation with my editor about it was in January. And she was like, I'm sure you've noticed there's this novel coronavirus and and like, but we're hopeful it's going to be contained, but we're sort of, keeping an eye on it. And then, so it was like kind of a going concern, and yeah, so I mean, I was definitely freaking out, and the thing that was the most surreal maybe was just that I felt like I didn't actually know what to do, even though it's like, well, here's what this character did, and here's what this character did, and here's all the things that like, one could have done in January if it wasn't like already too late to stock up on N95 masks or like all those things, like the ship has sailed on those by March. So I was just like, it's so weird to have imagined this in such detail and have written about it, and to still just be like exactly in the same position as everybody else. Like, just like, I'm not sure what to do. Do I send my kid to daycare this day? Do I pull her out? Like when do you kind of stop going outside? And so I was kind of grateful that there was this lockdown. Like, okay, it's stopping. Everyone's stopping now, because I still, felt paralyzed by some of those decisions, which now we're kind of facing them again. And so I'm finding it like harder now that things are reopened and making, like, wrestling with those choices, I find tricky.
And what year is your novel set?
It's set in 2020.
So kind of like this prophetic, like, quality to the whole thing. Like, I just love like the fact that it came out the same year.
Yeah, it's very surreal, and there's a character in the novel who has written a pandemic novel,
For Meta.
which is like the weirdest sort of.
Well, you read that and you're talking about a grainy feed, and we were watching you on your
I
grainy
know.
feed. It was like so many levels.
I
It was
know.
amazing.
I know. It was weird. And it is weirder to kind of go through the text now and see stuff. I mean, to go back to Richard, your question about like our process with the work as it goes through different stages, like once it's sort of done, it's like I don't look at it again unless I'm reading from it. And so there's this sort of defamiliarization and kind of going through some of these passages to find something to read tonight was really like surreal all over again, I guess.
Any other questions?
Hi there. I want to go back to what Laura said about the connectedness and losing that connection with people during the current pandemic, and to comment on Saleema's work. The pandemic is really well realized. It's fascinating what you've written, but the main elements that I took from your book was about the connectedness of people and the way that you spin people together. I found just amazing to read. And the fact that even though, you know, people are related here and related there, when you bring them together, it's not telegraphed at all. It always surprised me. And so made the book very dynamic. So I just wanted to comment on that. The connectedness Laura talks about is what I took from your book. The pandemic's very interesting in itself, but it's the people as they spin together that was truly fascinating. So
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for reading it.
And thanks for all the readings and the music tonight. It's been very good.
Okay. Thank you, Christine, for facilitating our conversation. Thanks, everybody, for your questions. And of course, thanks to our authors for their books and for their time spent with us and their just entertaining and educating.
Thanks, everyone. It was great
Thank
to be
you
here.
all.
Nice to see everybody in their homes, too.
Yes, of course. A lot of fascinating backgrounds on my computer screen here. I'll just wrap things up in a formal way. Again, of course, thank you to Ellen Jaffe, Laura Furster, Richard Kemick, and Kemick, pardon me, Richard Kemick, Saleema, for your works. We're going to do our best to highlight them on our Facebook page, and of course through our conversations through the next little while. I'd just like to draw your attention to the next LitLive online, which will be Sunday, October the 4th at 7:30. And if you're on Facebook, please join or have a look at the LitLive Reading Series group, because Gary will post the announcement there very shortly, and there'll be a link to the next Zoom event for LitLive in October. And of course, if you want to be on our mailing list, you could get a monthly email from Susan Shaw just reminding you of LitLive. So please just put your email address into our chat line, and we will take it out and add it to Susan's list, and you'll get communication from us once a month. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating and attending in tonight's great experiment. I hope we passed the audition, and to all, a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thanks.
There.